Hello, welcome to Holistically Speaking. I am Morella DeVoe, your host. Our mission with Holistically Speaking is to be the avenue through which the voices of holistic health reach you at the time you need it most. And as you know, we have a variety of practitioners. Last week we talked about Chinese astrology. I'm always looking to bring different voices and different solutions to you. The show today is a little bit different. It's something that concerns every single one of us. I know very little about the subject, so I'm very, very happy to have my guest today, Ray Pealer.
Hi.
Thank you so much for joining me. And what we're going to be talking about is electromagnetic radiation, or what we normally hear abbreviated as EMFs, right?
Right, exactly.
So let's start off the bat, assuming that some people have no idea what EMFs or electromagnetic radiation is,
Right.
And set that starting point for our viewers. Like, what is it and where is it?
Right. Well, EMF is really an umbrella term.
Mm-hmm.
So it means any type of man-made frequencies, right? And recently, there's a whole bunch of new things that are now out there that didn't used to be there. You know, back in the 1980s, we were concerned about power lines and whether you lived too close to one of the really large power lines, and there was a lot of controversy about that. But over the last 10 or 15 years, there's been a lot more of a focus on the wireless technologies.
Okay.
So there's like different branches of this, but that's really the concerning one, is the wireless now, because it carries much further than the old power line problems.
Okay.
So, yeah.
So we're talking primarily of the kind of the waves we don't see, like the cell phone. What else? Like.
Right. Well, you know, now we have Wi-Fi and Bluetooth and cell phones and cell towers and all these kinds of things. That it's really quite new if you think about it. It's only been
Right.
about 10 or 15 years. And
Right.
I think culturally we haven't really come to terms with how to handle it. Is there a safe way? Is it completely safe? Or, you know, are there some safety precautions that we should take?
Yeah.
You know?
So I'm curious as to hearing from you how you got on this topic. How did you, because now this is you're consulting with people about the EMFs in their homes, and we'll share more with you about that. But how did you get on this bandwagon? What made you interested in it?
It was sort of a strange path. It feels sort of like destined at this point. But I mean, at one point I didn't know what an EMF was. I was about to buy a house out in the country, and I brought in a consultant to sort of just check everything out, check for lead paint, check for mold and all that kind of thing. And it was really eye-opening to have a healthy house consultant come in and check things out. And one of the funny things was, he came into the master bedroom. You know, we were there with the real estate agent, and he just looks in the room and he goes, you know, she wouldn't need the cough syrup if she got rid of the mothballs. And we're like, what? What are you talking about? And there was a bottle of cough syrup right next to the side of the bed, and the real estate agent looked at me like with this, you know, totally
Right.
distrustful look, like this is crackpot. But then he goes over and he opens up the drawer, and there was this huge pile of mothballs in the. It really made me wonder, how much could our home environment affect our health, right?
Enormously.
Right. So everything was going pretty well until he pulls out this little orange, you know, meter, this little device, and he starts walking around. He said, "Oh, this isn't good. We got a problem here." I'm like, "What do you mean we have a problem?"
Yeah, what's going on?
He said, "Well, it's EMFs." I mean, what's an EMF, right?
Yeah.
And so basically what happened was, what looked to be sort of like a standard power line turned out to be something much different. It was like a feeder line that was bringing in electricity for the whole area. And so the levels were much higher than you'd want to have. And so I started to look at research back then. Mostly it all comes from other countries. It's from Scandinavia. And they found that there was a higher risk of certain issues like leukemia for children and so on if you were too close to these lines and if the levels were too high.
Wow. And so I'm really curious about the fact that you just said most of the research is not from the U.S. Is there little research done on EMFs in the U.S.? Like, what's the...
There's next to none.
Is there a reason for that?
I think it's really politics and big business. The EPA used to have a world-class research facility here in the United States, and they had like several $1 million per year annual budget. but that was defunded right about the same times that cell phones came out. And it went from something like 3 million a year down to one guy half-time,
Wow.
right at the same time.
Wow, that's kind of unsettling, but I want to stay on of course we could go down the political side of this conversation, but I really want to stay on the more kind of health-oriented,
Yes.
and so what does this mean and what can we do about it? So what does it mean for people as we're living with cell phone towers and Wi-Fi and wireless printers and whatever? What does it mean?
Well, I think one of the common misconceptions when we first start thinking about this is, oh, it's everywhere and there's nothing we can do about it. I hear that a lot when we first start talking with moms or with dads and so on. And it's really not the case. I mean, yes, there are radio waves that are everywhere. We have radio towers and television towers and cell towers, but you have such control in your own home, in most situations, about how high the levels are.
Right.
So, for instance, I live near Montpelier, and in the average home there, the levels outside might be around like 5 units, 5 microwatts. But in a home, if you have all these devices, the Wi-Fi and the cordless phones and so on, the levels could be 10,000 or higher.
Yeah, and you
So
have a little illustration of a house that
Yeah.
maybe we can show.
Sure.
That has like almost every room emanating, right? Emanating some sort of like radiation. And there we have it. So what are some of the devices here that you're kind of pointing at?
Well, it's the thing, we just can't see this. We can't see this or hear it or smell it. So this image just really shows, if we could see it, what it would look like. The worst one in most people's homes are these cordless phones. The old ones were fine, really.
Wow, so the cordless phone that maybe I'm looking at the master bedroom.
Right.
So you might have your cordless phone in your master bedroom.
Right.
And it's not even your cell phone.
Right. The old cordless phones would only emit when you're making a phone call, right? Because the little phone had to communicate to the base and so on. But about 5 or 10 years ago, all new cordless phones that came out radiated all the time, 24/7. So, and we just don't know this. You go to the store, you want to buy a phone, and you buy a cordless phone, like everyone else, and they come in these packs of 3 or so. And unfortunately, some people put these right next to their beds.
Wow.
And it's about the same radiation as if you had a cell tower on the street, down the street.
Oh my God.
And I mean, I've seen, what really got me involved with this was I was doing some door-to-door activism, and people asked me to come in their homes and sort of show them what the levels were. And once we started making these changes, I saw a lot of people whose health immediately responded to removing this unnecessary radiation. Like people who had sleep problems,
Right.
or people who had headaches that had been there for several years, or nausea or dizziness and all kinds of things. And it was really, really intense to see that as they backtracked and they thought about this, some of these issues happened as soon as they brought the technology into their homes.
Wow. And so now we have, of course, the wireless phone.
Yeah.
We have our cell phone, our iPad, laptop,
much.
maybe all of those in our bedroom,
Yeah,
right?
Right.
And the wireless router somewhere.
Right.
So we have all of these things. How about TVs and remote controls and
Right.
those also?
When I was a kid, my mom, wouldn't allow us to sit too close to the television. I don't know about you, but it was like there's like this line.
I do remember there was like this health effect that you shouldn't sit so close to the TV.
Right, and measuring that, the old TVs, they did produce a field, the big old boxes. The new ones, not so much. I mean, if you're a few feet away, you're pretty well fine. But this wireless is meant to go for 20, 100 feet or more. Right. Through walls and everything. It's very different.
Yeah, and when you're in, I live in condos, so I pick up all of my neighbors' wireless, and even in the next unit over, so they're quite a ways away.
Yes.
So what are some of the health effects that have been observed, and is there research around that? But what in your research have you found? Well,
most of the time what we hear about in the news is we hear about a study about cell phones that might find an effect, or we hear another study that shows that there is an effect, and we really are left with this idea that there's not much out there, that the jury's out. But what's really intense is to look at the research itself, and you'll find that there are thousands and thousands of peer-reviewed studies showing effects.
Wow.
It's really a cover-up.
Wow.
And I don't really want to look at it as a conspiracy, but there are scientists who are trying to get the word out.
Yeah.
It's just such big business.
Right.
And yeah, let's just say that.
Yeah, because I can imagine some people hearing you speak and say, oh, well, there you go with your conspiracy theories
Sure.
of cover-ups. But so tell us about what are some of the research, what they've pointed to as to, you know, any health effects that you've...
Back in the early 90s, this really became public whenever somebody went on one of the major TV shows, and and this was a guy, a businessman, who had supposedly developed brain cancer from using a cell phone. And what happened was, this was Larry King actually, they, as they talked about this with a neurosurgeon said, yes, this was related to the cell phone, you know, the stocks tanked the next day. I mean, it was pretty much mayhem for the telecom industry. And so some damage control went into effect. And what resulted from that was a large-scale research project, like a $30 million research project that was partly funded by the industry and partly funded by government. And what they found, among other things, was that there was DNA damage that was happening. That same research has been replicated in several other large studies, and now we have hundreds of studies showing DNA damage.
Right.
So that's a precursor to other things,
Yeah.
and that's been replicated enough that it's pretty well irrefutable at this point.
Wow. So you've mentioned childhood leukemia,
Yeah.
Brain cancer.
Yeah.
Are there any other conditions that have shown clear correlation with EMFs?
So a lot of associations at this point, but we don't have too much what we would call causal evidence.
Okay.
There was a study that just was released last week that was pretty concerning, that shows tumor propagation in mice. So we have some animal studies that are there. You know, in 2011, the World Health Organization classified wireless radiation as a possible human carcinogen, but we really didn't hear about that. That didn't make much in the news.
And that was in 2011.
2011.
So it's been a few years.
So it's the same category as DDT and lead paint and some other things that you really wouldn't want to spend much time around. Since then, scientists have said that this should be reclassified. This should be elevated as a class 2A probable human carcinogen because of these animal studies and other things. So what we have is we have long-term effects, like we have concerns that autism and ADHD and these behavioral problems, things that a lot of teachers are seeing, cognitive issues. And really, it's just astounding how much research is there.
Right.
And then we have also this other category, which are sort of short-term effects. And it looks as though about 5 to 10% of the population is more sensitive, like you would be to anything. Like, you know, some people are a little bit allergic to like peanut butter, but other people, if you open the jar in the same room, you know, they're going to have a full-out attack. And so the term for this is called electrosensitivity. And basically what it means is somebody might experience headaches or fatigue or difficulty concentrating, a lot of these things just in like short period of time, just within a few hours of exposure.
That's so interesting. You mentioned autism, and I know that you have a chart. I'm curious as to what that chart says or points out as to, what is it, the incidence of autism as related to EMF. So if we could pull that up. So can you tell us a little bit about what this is?
So the first line, the red line, I think, in the dotted line, shows the elevation of this type of EMF in the environment. It's really changed a lot over the last 10 or 15 years because all these new cell towers have come up in areas that just never were there before.
Right.
And then the next line, the blue line, is the curve for autism, which has gone from about 1 in 10,000 children to 1 in 50 children in just a period of 20 years. In
just 20 years. That's the thing that's mind-boggling about autism. It was so rare when I was a kid, and now it just seems to be a kind of a common diagnosis or condition.
It's a full crisis, really, because if you think about where's that curve going, where are we going to head to, like 1 in 5 kids or the majority of kids? It's not really being addressed by the government at this point. Right. So now this is where we can get into some good news.
Yes,
a lot of heavy
let's
stuff.
talk about what we can do.
Now, so Dr. Martha Herbert, she's a Harvard pediatrician, child neurologist, has shown through a lot of research that there is an effect with autism and EMF. So it's very clear that there is some association. So this isn't just sort of linking things together. That there are a lot of experts who are showing this. But what's interesting is some doctors are starting to get on board and realize this, and what they're doing with children with autism is they're asking their parents to go on sort of like an EMF diet for a while, an EMF reduction protocol.
Right.
And so what they do is they turn the Wi-Fi off, at least at night. You can just turn it off at night. That's not going to hurt anybody. Get rid of the cordless phones and so on, and then also turn the bedroom power off, which might seem a little weird at first, but it's. And what happens is flip the breaker to the bedroom, because the wires around the bedroom are charged and they emit a field as well. And what they're finding is remarkable. They're finding that children with autism who have never spoken before start talking within a week or two. Children with all kinds of behavioral problems, like kids that are just tearing the blinds off the walls, are normal and are talking and just composed in a really short period of time. And that shows how much our neurology is affected by all these frequencies.
Right. Yeah, and it's interesting because in certain schools of thought, they look at the nervous system as an electrical system. Right. So if we're electrical beings, what's all of this electricity and all these waves doing to us, right?
Exactly. We are definitely electrical. If you want to check the health of the heart, right, what do? You're going to check with an EKG to see that if we're not producing electricity, we're dead, really. So all the nerves are all communicating with these different little electrical impulses.
Right. And the other thing too is that you were before the show you were talking about how prevalent this is, and you have a picture of 4 friends at a cafe, and really everybody's like on their smartphones, on iPads, tablet readers, computers, etc. And we're all at these wireless cafes, right?
It's amazing, really, that nothing I think like this has ever happened before, that such a massive change, change across all cultures.
Right.
I mean, we now have more cell phones than we have people, in at least in the United States.
We do?
Yeah, there's over 300 and some million phones.
So Ray, what can we do about this? So do we need to start flipping the breakers off in our house every night? Or so what are some of the things that you think?
Well, the first thing to do is the easy stuff, like the cordless phone that I was talking about. I mean, seeing is believing. If you have somebody come in and measure, that's really good. Or you can get yourself a little meter and you can measure. Because otherwise it's a little bit, just sort of nebulous. But the first thing, start with a cordless phone. Just unplug it for a week. Try it out like an experiment, right? You don't have to go completely change. Go live like Little House on the Prairie or something,
exactly,
right?
Yeah.
But start with that. Turn the Wi-Fi off at night. If you want to, flip the breakers off. Just at least your bedroom. Whenever I go into a home, we are more calculated about it. We get the numbers down to what the scientists and the doctors say are the safe levels. So it's like more calculated, but it's a great way to start, and it's free. Really. There's nothing, no charge, and see what happens. See if your sleep improves. I think a lot of us our awareness and our senses have been dulled to this. And we can really become, a lot of people's sleep changes. It's amazing what happens. We call it creating a sleep sanctuary. And we can bring the levels down by thousands of times in the bedroom without having to do anything major.
Wow. And what about cell phones is my question. I have heard people say you should never sleep with your cell phone in your bedroom or turn it off. Does turning it off make a difference or not? Or they say, at least 6 feet away from your body. Help us make sense of that. Okay,
so on the subject of cell phones, cell phones communicate for several miles, right? If you think about it. They can go 4 or 5 miles at least. So they're definitely going to emit something for several feet within our bedroom. And we don't really think about that. We don't hear about that too much. All long-term studies on cell phones have found an increased risk of brain tumors. So that's another thing to be aware of. So the first thing is, wean yourself off of using it all the time. A lot of us are just way too glued to it. In terms of the bedroom, okay, so now the smartphones have several different features. Not only do they have the ability to talk, but they've got the Wi-Fi and the Bluetooth, and some of them have these hotspot settings.
Right.
You want to turn those off. You really don't want those on, because that means that it's radiating, for 20, 50 feet in all directions at least.
Right.
In the bedroom, yeah, I really recommend turning it off completely and use just a little clock instead.
Right.
Otherwise, just make sure that those settings are turned off.
Right. And so one of the things, just imagining people thinking, wow, is this health effect even real? You have a couple of microscope views of blood cells before and after exposure, or normal, right? Yeah. So I really want to show those to our viewers so that you could tell us a little bit about what these slides show. So this slide, can you tell us a little bit about what this is?
So these are from the Weston A. Price Foundation, which just came out with an article just a few weeks ago, actually a month ago, and they're really concerned about health and diet, right? And this first slide are your blood cells without any type of EMF exposure. They're all round, they're all flowing. It looks good.
Right. And the next slide.
The next slide is what happens to somebody with a smartphone in a backpack for about 45 minutes.
And so these, so essentially what we're seeing is the blood cells are what, like, kind of coagulating, or
I mean, it's very telling. It's very visually telling. It looks like they're all huddling together, trying to become safe. The term for this is Rouleau syndrome, and they're all just clumping on top of each other. Now, it's pretty amazing.
So what? I'm trying to grasp. So what's happening in my body as my blood cells are getting sticky like that? What?
Right. Well, the oxygen flow is not going to be there. The nutrient flow is not going to be there. The waste products can't get out. And what we're seeing is premature aging is one of the things. That oxidation of the tissues is, there's a lot of other effects that you could imagine too, if that transfer of information isn't happening, if all those processes are sort of shut down.
Wow. It's kind of troubling. So so we've talked about getting rid of the cordless phone.
Yes.
Right? Maybe powering off the cell phone. Well, definitely powering off the cell phone, at least in your bedroom, right?
And those settings, go on your smartphone and check them out. You'll see Bluetooth. Turn all those off. And I mean, if I had a meter here, I mean, you would hear it go from like blaring these noises down to quiet, really, just by making those little changes.
Right.
And that's very concerning. A lot of people have them in their pockets. They don't know about it. And we know there's a lot of people with trying to have children who are unable to. There's a lot of fertility problems these days.
Yeah.
It's pretty obvious, really, that this is a factor.
It is troubling. So there's something that I've seen in the past, people selling things like magnets or things that you could put on your wall, or your circuit breakers or whatever. Does that make any difference?
I steer away from that, because if I were to measure it, it wouldn't change my measurements at all. Now, there are some products that I have clients who swear by them, but not as their first line of changes. They make all the other changes, and then they say that they bring these things in. There are a few pendants and so on. I really didn't believe this for a long period of time. I certainly don't sell them or anything like that, but I've talked to a few health practitioners who do like applied kinesiology and so on, and they say that it will totally change the sort of their testing process.
Physiology of the
It'll
person.
give them false readings when they're trying to check the person out, so they actually have to have the person take the device off of them.
Interesting.
That's not all of them.
Right. So some devices are doing something,
some of them,
but we're not totally sure.
I wouldn't rely on it, though.
Right.
Really.
Okay. There's another image that you brought to share with us about an experiment with some sprouts.
Right.
And I'm curious as to what that experiment found and how that translates into our everyday life.
Well, I wanted to bring the most visual, graphically impacting pictures I could. And this one is, You know, kids get to the bottom of it faster than sometimes we can. This was an experiment that was done by some Danish students, and they grew sprouts. So on the left side of the screen are some sprouts that were grown away from Wi-Fi. It was grown in a classroom without Wi-Fi. And on the right side are sprouts that they tried to grow right next to a Wi-Fi router.
Oh, wow.
And they didn't grow.
They never sprouted.
Right.
So what should my takeaway be with that? So if if I have my wireless router in my living room and my sprouts aren't sprouting, what do I take away?
well, one thing about that study is that the levels right next to a router are extremely high, whereas 5 feet away they're going to be lower. So that's probably why they didn't germinate. I don't know if they would have had the same effect 10 feet away. And most people don't know that, so they'll have that router right on their desk without knowing about it. The best thing to do is to wire it. If you have a laptop, you can totally wire it. You're not going to have the same mobility. But then if you turn things off correctly, there's going to be no radiation coming out at all.
Right.
But you still have internet.
So, and it's funny because I have been thinking about that in the last few years, like, oh, maybe I should get rid of my wireless router and go back to, good old plugging in the high-speed internet but most computers now don't even have the plug.
You can get them. Even the iPads and all these devices, you have to sort of use an adapter, but most devices you can get them to work, not the cell phones, but certainly the tablets.
So obviously you've mentioned in passing that you help people measure the radiation in their home. So I want to be sure to let people know how to contact you. You have a website where I'm sure you have loads of information.
Yeah.
So we could show that website to our viewers. So your website is emrsafety.net, and so you come into people's homes and do consultations. So again, you guys may want to write this down, emrsafety.net. And I would imagine that especially people with, I'm curious, I would love to know what it is in my house, but especially people with some serious health conditions that maybe have gotten worse in the last few years, they could really benefit from.
I get all kinds of interesting calls. About 2 months ago, I got a call from a father whose daughter was just suddenly becoming nauseated and wasn't able to sleep. Now, fortunately, he had had a conversation with a teacher who had sort of alerted him to this. And once we got rid of the Wi-Fi and we used the wires, the child was able to sleep fine in her room. What happened was it was all right underneath her room in the office right there.
Wow.
But I've seen some other things too. I've seen some really serious stuff.
Yeah. Can you tell us about, do we have another minute or so, can you tell us quickly
some doctors are starting to send their patients to me, and I get the worst case ones usually. So I got somebody on a second brain tumor.
Wow.
And I tried to have a really open mind. I didn't want to have any preconceived notions about what I was going to come across when I went there. But sure enough, when I got there, the levels in that bedroom were the highest I had seen anywhere.
Wow.
He had the router right next to his bed. He had this cordless phone. He didn't even know it. It was sort of like behind the dresser, and a bunch of other stuff. So levels were 40,000 units when we measured that room. Within 2 minutes of turning all this off, we got him down to less than 1. So we dropped it by 400,000 times in 5 minutes. And this was a dad, right? This was a dad with little kids. So it was very intense to be through that process and to look into his eyes. But I'd like to have some of the easier sort of like preventive kind of situations
when
as
people
well.
are not in such dire health. Well, we've pretty much run out of time, but I would have had so many other questions to ask you. Thank you so much for joining me. Thank you for watching. Please start thinking about what you can disconnect, unplug, maybe move your router, get rid of your cordless phone, and turn off your cell phone from time to time. Thank you for joining me. Take care.